The economy is troubling for many these days, and health care is just one part of life that has become more challenging for some. Legislation to address health care was presented in a proposed budget amendment last summer, but in order to get the budget passed, that was removed and put on the back burner. The Healthy Wisconsin proposal is still appealing for some, while others have different ideas to address the problem. This is Healthy Wisconsin, an ongoing struggle, as we look at health care legislation in and for Wisconsin. I'm Wayne Sorge. Wisconsin Governor Jim Doyle brought his proposal for health care reform in a message to Eau Claire in January.
Now, one of the most significant issues small businesses face is health care. Jeff and Pat have focused a lot of their time in the legislature working on this very important issue. And let me just give you a couple of basic facts. In Wisconsin, small businesses, 50 employees or less, pay 18% more in health care costs than larger businesses. And maybe the more troubling number is only 44% of our employees in small businesses are covered by health insurance, whereas it's close to 80% in large businesses. In the country, half of the people uninsured in the United States are hardworking people who are working in small businesses. Now, it's not that the small business owners are mean people. They are facing a very hard choice. They are facing a very hard choice. If they provide health insurance, they aren't going to make any money, given the cost of health insurance. And if they're not making any money, they're not going to be in. There's not much point to be in business. So we have to do something practical, direct, that gives help for small business insurance. And I laid out a plan of Badger Choice that is a means by which we can help to vastly reduce the administrative costs. We can bring the pool of 800,000 small business employees in Wisconsin together into a single pool to help us lower those costs. We can get away from the one-size-fits-all, where if you're in one small business, you get whatever the plan might be, if you're lucky enough to be in a business that has it, where we can allow employees to go to a single marketplace with their employer's share and pick the plan that is best for them. We will allow them to transport that plan from one employer to another, and we can significantly reduce the cost to private business. Now, this is going to come with a fight. You know, if it was that easy, it would have been done a long time ago. So let's not underestimate the fact that there are those that have a vested interest in the insurance system as it currently works. And what insurers are able to do now is cherry-pick those small businesses. And to say to the 35 computer programmers sitting over here behind desks, none of whom have any health problems at all, we'll give you a good rate. But to say that those 35 metal fabricators in that little business I was talking to you about, we're going to charge you so much that you can't afford it. To me, it's a question of basic fairness. You can have two people with exactly the same health history, exactly the same age. One of them's working behind a desk and one of them's working on a shop floor. One of them will hopefully be able to have insurance that he or she can afford, and the other one is so far out of the price range that it is getting harder and harder for them to afford it. So it is important, I believe, that we bring some basic fairness, basic stability, and help to lower those costs. We've made some major, with Jeff and Pat's help, we have extended health insurance now through Badger Care to all the children in the state of Wisconsin. We will soon, next year, be moving towards having health care for childless people who do not have children under 18 years of age, but who are earning wages so low that they can't afford anything. Again, a simple question of fairness. You can have two people working at the same employer, earning exactly the same amount of money, low-wage jobs. The one person has a child under 18, he or she has health insurance. The other person doesn't have a child under 18, he or she doesn't have health insurance. And with Badger Care Plus, we are now going to address that issue as well. So we've made some very major steps forward here in Wisconsin. And I believe now, with Badger Choice, we can do something to help small businesses be able to provide affordable insurance to their employees.
One of the primary backers of the Healthy Wisconsin proposal was State Senator Kathleen Feinhout, and she remains determined but realistic about the chances for that plan or one similar to it to succeed in the near future.
I think that we knew that it was going to be a very difficult issue. There is no doubt that I underestimated the power of the opposition. I never dreamed that I personally and my son and my husband would be attacked in the Milwaukee media market. I think there are very many forces, of which I'm just beginning to learn, that are opposed to any change in health care reform, and these forces came out of the woodwork in a very strong way when it became public that the Senate Democrats were interested in making the issue of health care reform a pivotal one in the budget debate. What we did, what the Senate Democrats did, was put Healthy Wisconsin into the budget. When we did this and make it a part of our formal budget proposal, it forced the issue to be part of the public debate in a way that had never been, in the history of the state of Wisconsin, never been that real. When it was that real, then the people who were very much opposed to Healthy Wisconsin rallied their forces, and rather than attack the plan on its merits, put together much misinformation that they took all across the state, and they took a personal attack, first at myself, and then Senator Robson, and then Senator Erpenbach. That we were the three leaders on this plan. It's very unfortunate that the debate became about us personally rather than about the merits of the bill. And it's also unfortunate that the people who were most opposed to the bill were intellectually so dishonest that they did not give the accurate information about the bill. Every criticism about the bill has a legitimate response. But we in the Senate didn't have the money to be able to push back on those legitimate responses. And when I look back on the summer, my first summer as senator, what I saw was at 4 different times people were running ads against me. Did I have the chance to counter any of those ads? Absolutely not. My campaign was in debt, $15,000. The amount of resources that I had to be able to push back were simply what I could do in the town hall meetings that I had, and I had over 20 different town hall meetings. We reached over 1,000 people. But what I could do was push back in the town hall meetings, and then I could in the different media discussions that we had, including the work that you done and the work that was done by many of the newspapers around the state. But just to get the counter to the misinformation out there was very difficult. So did we underestimate what might have been expected? We did, in the sense that we underestimated the intensity of the opposition. And we knew from the very beginning that we didn't have the votes in the Assembly to be able to pass the bill. So we knew that eventually the bill was going to come out of the budget and that we would have to pass the budget. Did anyone anticipate that the budget process was going to be that difficult? I don't think so. But what we had when we were looking at the budget were 27 legislators that had made a pledge to a Washington, D.C. group saying they would under no circumstances ever raise taxes in their career as a representative. This is what made passing any budget in the Assembly that difficult, because these people were beholden to this special group in Washington, D.C. that absolutely did not want them to raise taxes. What we looked at when we looked at a budget, when we started off with federal funding that used to be there that wasn't there anymore. We started off with $600 million in commitments that had been made in previous legislatures that were coming due. We started off with over $1 billion in commitments that were related to what we call the cost to continue, just raises in insurance and taxes and health insurance. I mean, not taxes, but commitments that the state had made related to just interest rates had gone up, the cost of health insurance, the cost of fuel. So just the cost to continue made made it almost impossible to pass a budget without somehow, somewhere, raising additional revenue. So we added on top of that, difficult budget year, Healthy Wisconsin, and we had an assembly that under no circumstances, 27 members were ever going to raise taxes of any sort, even though, as we talked about earlier, when we look at Healthy Wisconsin, we're actually saving the state and the people of the state quite a bit of money. When we think about all of this, what I can say is we took a very large first step. We now know where the enemies are to true health care reform. And I am convinced more than ever every day that the only way we're ever going to see true health care reform is because the people of the state of Wisconsin want that. And they have to want it so bad that they're willing to say to the candidates, how will you support Healthy Wisconsin or some kind of serious health care reform? What are you going to do to make sure this happens? If we're going to have real health care reform, we have to have a legislature that's committed to it. The Senate is committed to it. Right now there are the votes in the Senate to pass Healthy Wisconsin again, but the Assembly is absolutely not committed to it. Can we change that? Absolutely. But the power is with the people who go to the ballot box. The power is with the people who send the representatives and senators to Madison. They hold the power to elect people who are either going to work for change or who are going to be beholden to the special interest groups that absolutely do not want to see any type of change happen.
Republican State Representative Jeff Wood has some reservations about how Healthy Wisconsin was presented, but he says he's open-minded about addressing the health care issue in the Assembly.
And keep in mind, Healthy Wisconsin, as it was proposed as a budget amendment, we'll wait to see if something comes out as a bill here. But if you have private insurance, which is the majority of people are still insured privately, you'd have to get rid of it and join the government plan whether you liked it or not. And well, you wouldn't have to join it, I guess, but you'd have to pay for it. You'd get taxed through your payroll tax to pay for a new health care plan, whether or not you wanted to switch or not. So there's some concerns about, taking away consumer choice, making them get rid of the doctors that they're going to now and the health care provider that they have now, and forcing them into a government plan where they don't really have those options. That's a big concern, too. I think anytime you take consumer choice out of, anything, you're going to drive up costs and increase the inefficiencies in it.
Some would say that there's a greater good in changing the system so that everyone has coverage.
Well, there is. Obviously there is, because if somebody doesn't have coverage and they go, well, number one, they're not getting the preventive care, which would save everybody money and their health in the long run. But number two, they go to emergency room care. We all pay that then. That gets cost shifted onto the rest of us. So there's obviously a benefit to everyone that has health care insurance that 100% of the people are covered. That prevents their insurance from increasing in the future. But how do you get there? And do you use an insurance model? Do you use a government takeover model and push the private sector out? So just because change or reform is needed doesn't justify, a government takeover without so much as a public hearing of our entire healthcare system. That's kind of the extreme. And if you're unwilling to do that, it seems a bit ridiculous to say, well, those guys won't support this. Well, introduce it, bring it forward. That's our job in the legislature. And you cannot pass a bill unless you're unwilling to go through the legislative process. It's there for a reason, not just to slow things down, but to provide some scrutiny. And, she's not going to have any success whatsoever in drastic reform to our healthcare system if she's not willing to have a public hearing on a bill. And so until that, I guess I don't take those threats any more seriously than I take the bill that doesn't exist, which is Healthy Wisconsin. It's not a bill.
Do you believe that there is a threat to people who are serving in the Assembly from those who would like to see the Healthy Wisconsin proposal become law?
Well, there's a threat if there's misinformation, and that's if people are under the assumption that there's a healthy Wisconsin proposal out there that's been through a process that could be voted on, and that's not the case. And you can't blame the Assembly members for that. That lies with the author and the Senate Majority Leader. It's the ball's in their court. They have to send it out of their court before they can yell at us for not returning it. And, it's stuck in the Senate. It's stuck in the Democrat majority Senate. It's not stuck in the Republican Assembly. It's never even been sent over. It's never been sent for a committee hearing. There's been no action on the bill. It's so far, in my opinion, the bill is still and has always been just one big press release with no intent by the author to make it become law.
Democratic State Representative Jeff Smith is disappointed about the process, but is still firmly in favor of health care reform.
To be perfectly honest, I haven't even talked to Jeff Wood for quite a while on this subject. But what I had authored a proposal early in 2007 that would have pooled or allowed all small business to pool with the state of Wisconsin employees to lower their costs for health care. Mm-hmm. And that was something that Jeff Wood really thought was a good idea at the time, and so the two of us have our names on this bill together, along with Ann Raychuk and some others. And it's been one of those cases of they don't want to talk about it. So it has not even been had a public hearing in committee, which is very frustrating. So we'll see if we can pull that or do something with that in this coming months.
And the mood in the Assembly as a whole, and especially in the leadership, is not to consider the proposal that was first presented in the Senate as a budget amendment and is now said to be awaiting action in the new year.
Here, I'm going to go off here on a little bit of a platform. It's very, very aggravating and frustrating when what I've seen, all I know just like anyone else, from the newspaper reports and press releases from Representative Hipsch, the Speaker of the Assembly, and as long as the Republican majority is in place, he's still proclaiming they will not even consider universal health care, despite what is coming down the road. I mean, this is something that is not going away. I mean, it's just totally aggravating and frustrating and appalling that they won't even consider another idea out there like what was presented in the Senate. Now, granted, there's got to be changes to that proposal, and I'm hoping that's what's happening right now, and I'm very hopeful that is what happens. We're not getting a lot of information from the Senate right now either, but from what I understand, and if they don't, I'll be aggravated about that too, because we should be listening. And what I heard, and I've reported back, and I know I'm not the only one who heard the same things of the concerns by small business. We need to address that, the cost to small business. We need to address the two-income family questions about that proposal and how it affects them as compared to one-income families. And so we want fairness, a little more fairness in that payment structure. And if we come up with something that does not address those, then I can't support it either. Then we have not been listening as a whole. But I have been listening, and I want those changes made, and there are possibilities. Now, again, going back to not addressing it at all, that's a problem. Now, if, for instance, my party does gain the majority in 2008 and we behave the same way, I'll be screaming then too. It doesn't matter what party it is. If we are unwilling to listen to different suggestions and ideas from either side, and we will not and refuse to have public hearings just because it happens to be the other party who proposed it, that's what's wrong with this democracy today, that we refuse to work together. And so it comes right back down to partisanship. This shouldn't be a partisan issue.
So while you have your name on a proposal, you're not very optimistic about that, but you are willing to look at all kinds of negotiated agreements that could, in your view, logically happen if people were willing.
That's right. And having something, imperfect as it might be in the end, is better than having nothing. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to accept that there's a problem, that it needs a great deal of fixing, not just some tax exemptions for HSAs, or not just giving some people exemptions or some people this or that. We need a wholesome change, and so something's got to happen. And again, if it isn't perfect, if we don't get all that we want, and the other side doesn't get all that they want, isn't that the process and how it works? And we need to sit down and be willing to listen to both sides.
So do you see it as a situation where we now have issues that need to be addressed even if nobody gets all that they want?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't expect to get all that I want. You know, maybe if I was a 20-something or 30-something naive young person who thought they're going to fix the world with one stroke. But I'm not. I'm somebody who's a realist, who understands I'm not going to get all that I want. And maybe all that I want isn't the right thing. We have to be willing again and again. I'm going to keep saying it. We have to listen. We have to sit down. And hopefully, so let's start looking at it on a positive side of the things that can happen. The things that can happen is the Senate, I am pretty sure, will have some proposal brought to through their committee and to their floor. And then we need to, and I really want to plead with the Assembly leadership, the Republican majority leadership in the Assembly, to please, let's have public hearing on this. We may not have to pass it, but we need to have public hearing and sit down and look for the benefits of passing something and what we can do to address concerns that they may have. But let's do something. There are people suffering out there.
Healthy Wisconsin is one way of addressing concerns about affordable health care, and the overall problem is a priority for many in the faith community in the state. The Reverend Robert McDougall is pastor of First Congregational United Church of Christ in Menominee, and he represents his denomination in the Wisconsin Council of Churches.
Well, the material that I see, I've been in the Menominee community for about 20 years now, and my local experience there addresses the healthcare issue on a lot of different levels. One, there are huge issues just around the taxation and concerns of the people about the costs of living. I think it is a huge burden the way that we currently run our tax situations, and I think people who are older people who are in homes and such are with property taxes and those kinds of issues are feeling a huge burden that way, and it comes up with school districts and a lot of the other governmental bodies. So I know that people are feeling the effects of costs rising in many different ways, and I bring up the tax issue just because in the school districts, our school district has been struggling with its budget over and over again for many years, and one of the huge issues is the rising cost of health care for teachers. I mean, in the district, personnel and their benefits and such, that is a huge issue. I also know that there is a rising number of people in Wisconsin that simply do not have health care insurance. There's a rising number of free clinics that have sprung up in the Chippewa Valley. Menominee has a free clinic. I know that Eau Claire has a free clinic. And we're trying to provide health care to people who can't afford health care by putting together these free clinics, which I think are really provide wonderful access point, but it's really an access point. It's really a beginning point And the numbers of people who are, out of the healthcare system on a regular basis is growing in Wisconsin. I know that it's between 500 and 600,000 people who really don't have much access at all to health care in Wisconsin. So there's more people who do not have access to it, more and more people, and it falls significantly on the poor. I have to admit that they are a significant part of the population that don't have access to health care. And it's not just the poor who are not working; it's people who are working too. They continue to more and more in jobs, businesses, and such. Offering the health care benefit is becoming less frequently offered to people. So when you are in a low-paying job, the benefits aren't there. More and more people who just simply do not have the resources to pay for health care. It's really growing. And then health care is increasing, I think, since in the last 6 or 7 years. Health care in Wisconsin has risen 10% a year for people on average. Those are statistics that are frequently and well known, and so I think on a host of different levels, it's becoming much more significant. And I really do believe that the piece about people feeling like they are healthcare insecure, that they could very easily lose their health care if their situation changed, whether it be job loss or if they have a significant medical issue. There's so many things that make our healthcare system precarious right now, it seems to me. And we seem to want to depend on a system that has been around for a long time that has become growingly ineffective. So,
with these problems, why is it something that the faith communities, through an organization like the Wisconsin Council of Churches, should be concerned about?
Well, I think in just about every document out of, at least, and I can speak for the Christian community anyhow, whether it be biblical background or other statements put out by denominational bodies and such, we see ourselves as people who are supposed to be concerned with the common good. That we are not only concerned just about ourselves, not just members within congregations, not just people within the Christian community, but all people in the state, that we need to be attentive to and be good advocates for those who don't have access to what is becoming a pretty critical issue in our society. We all need to have access to decent, affordable, accessible health care. Some people, call it a matter of justice, that it is one of those parts of our society that we really believe all people should have access to for their well-being, for their families' well-being, for the well-being of the community in general. That, obviously healthier people are going to make a stronger community, and we need to make sure that that's available for all people in the community.
At the Eau Claire office of Wisconsin Citizens Action, Tom Ahrens remains hopeful that a plan to address the needs of those without adequate health care in Wisconsin can be approved.
Well, it's very important. I think both statewide and nationwide, one of the major problems identified by the voters is affordable health care. People can't afford it anymore. And less and less people are getting insurance through their employers. I think that number is dropping to around 50% and maybe even below 50% by now. More and more people are becoming uninsured. More and more people are forced into high deductible plans where they can't see a doctor because they can't afford the deductibles. So they just don't treat illnesses. And I think the system is unsustainable as it is, and something's got to be done to fix it.
Do you like the Healthy Wisconsin proposal?
Yeah, our organization endorsed it. We think it's a good proposal. We think it addresses the areas of administrative waste and of costs and high costs and of getting people insurance at an affordable price. We're open to other programs, other health care programs, other proposals, but we haven't heard any. We haven't heard any proposals for reform. And we hear things about, well, everybody should pay a $4,000 deductible, or we should have the prices online on the internet. Well, those things aren't going to solve the problems. We're looking for a comprehensive reform proposal that will make health care affordable to the working people of Wisconsin.
The Assembly is talking about a proposal that would just involve expanding the base of the plan that state employees have and making it available for everyone, but not going any farther than that. Would that help a lot?
Well, that would help some, but that's basically what Healthy Wisconsin was. It was basically the state employees plan available to all the residents of the state of Wisconsin, other than those in the federal plan or those covered by Social Security. And and all along we've said that if that plan is good enough for the state employees and the state legislators, and now good enough for some other people, why isn't it good enough for everybody in the state? We think it is.
Are you optimistic that something can be done either this year or soon?
I'm probably not optimistic that something's going to be done in the next few months. We have the same state legislature we had 3 months ago, and nothing was passed by that legislator during that session of the legislature. So I'm not real confident that anything will be passed during this term. However, I think the issue is at the tipping point right now, and I think if something doesn't get passed, we're going to have a major change in who our representatives and senators are, both at the national level and the state level. And then I think something may get done.
Will organizations like yours try to help make this an issue in the elections that are coming up?
Yeah, because we think that since it's the major issue of our 90,000 members, and we believe it's a major issue for everybody in the state and everybody in the country, we think it should be an issue in the election, both at the state and federal level. The people running for these offices need to talk about things that are important to the people, and not just the things that'll get them sound bites on TV or get them on Jay Leno. They need to be talking to issues that affect the constituents, and that's what health care is.
How would you propose holding them accountable during the election process?
Well, we're encouraging people to look at their health, look at all the candidates, what their health care plans are. Don't let them punt on the issue. Make them define their plan, make them be specific, and then vote for the people that have the best plans. And don't vote for people that have no plans or that have plans that don't really help you as a citizen. So the best way to hold them accountable is by voting or not voting, by getting up off the front of the TV and getting out to the polls and doing it based on what's important to you and your family.
I assume you feel like the Senate pretty much did the right thing, and the Assembly failed to act on it. Is that a way to size it up?
Well, I think the Senate passed a reform bill and attempted to fix the problem. The Assembly dropped that plan and didn't come up with an alternative plan. So nothing got done. So I think your characterization is correct. The Assembly dropped the ball. The Senate ran with it, and when it got to the Assembly, it stopped right there.
And the bill was actually an amendment to the budget, which they had to drop in order to get the budget finalized, but do you think they can salvage enough of the original plan?
Yeah, I think that if people were concerned with the process, or representatives and senators were concerned with the process, well, now they have an opportunity to bring the bill up as a standalone bill and deal with it.
How much follow-through are you expecting them to have? You didn't seem too optimistic about this, the remaining part of the session.
Well, I'm hoping that a bill will be introduced in one or both of the houses, and at that point some action will be taken, at least hearings held, and to give the people an opportunity to show up and tell these legislators who, the ones that don't believe that this is an important issue, to re-educate them that it is an important issue.
What are the consequences of a lack of action here in Wisconsin, in the Eau Claire area in particular?
More and more people becoming uninsured, more people becoming underinsured, more companies. As you may know, there was a study that came out about 3 weeks ago that basically said the Eau Claire to River Falls I-94 corridor has the highest health insurance costs in the state. As a result, any employers in this region are going to be spending more on health insurance than employers in Madison and employers in other parts of the state. Therefore, the economic development of this area is going to be hindered, solely because the cost of products made around here is going to be more because of health care. So you're going to see underinsured people, people that aren't insured. You're going to see employers either dropping health insurance so they can compete, or basically being underbid by other areas of the state. If the legislators want to write this portion of the state off as far as economic development and its people, they can do it by doing nothing. They have to come up with a plan.
Do you see this as a Democrats versus Republicans plan, or a Assembly versus Senate issue?
I see the issue of health care as a bipartisan issue. I think that a lot of people, and people I've talked to personally, be they Republicans or Democrats or independents, are having trouble purchasing health care, or health insurance, and having trouble paying for health care. I think there are people in the legislature and in the Congress that want to make it a partisan issue, but it's not. It involves everybody, and the solution's got to involve both sides of the aisle.
Well, this is one where I have to, speak about the approach that the Wisconsin Council of Churches is taking, which, is something of my own perspective, and yet I deviate from that a bit too. So I'm trying to distinguish what is Wisconsin Council of Churches, because the Wisconsin Council of Churches is not really advocating one particular plan or another. The Patients First plan with the health savings accounts that many legislators are trying to gain support for is one that the Wisconsin Council of Churches is trying to hold forums around the state. Last year we held 25 forums around the state to discuss health care plan options. And they presented material on both material that would cover the health savings account, but also Healthy Wisconsin as well. So it's the Wisconsin Council of Churches is not specifically advocating one or another per se, but they do go ahead and list, when it comes to accessibility, affordability, who really gains access to health care for them. They try to say, what the issues are with the Patients First plan with respect to making it affordable and accessible for everyone, which I would say is the goal of the Wisconsin Council of Churches, is to make it accessible and affordable for everyone. And what that specific plan looks like is not what the Wisconsin Council of Churches is specifically advocating, but they would say I believe, in their material and what they have put in, out in the communities, is that Healthy Wisconsin probably is more inclusive that way. But they would also raise issues about which ones, keep the cost of health care, somewhat controlled. How to, not necessarily increase taxes, because no one who is advocating even Healthy Wisconsin is really calling that a tax. They're calling it, the healthcare expense, even though it comes in through a governmental body and it gets paid that way. It is, they're clear to say this is a great reduction, actually, in the cost of health care for the Wisconsin community if they pursued it that way. The Patient First plan would say that, some of the ways of implementing the health savings account would also reduce the costs. But I think there are a lot of strong indications that Healthy Wisconsin has addressed the complexity of that issue in some powerful ways. So, the issue about, taxation is always a huge issue in our day. The business community, their role versus, individuals paying for that, and access to, different doctors, medical plans, those kinds of things are ones that we really need to evaluate. And I think that the Healthy Wisconsin plan, this is my own personal opinion, addresses those in a much more equitable and broad-reaching sense, and I think it could have huge impact on our society in this state. How people are treated, whether they feel like they can move from place to place, whether they're insecure about losing their health care and their health insurance and those kinds of things. I think it's a pretty powerful proposal, but that's not necessarily what the Wisconsin Council of Churches is specifically advocating.
But you, as an individual citizen and pastor of a church, you would like to see that kind of a solution reached.
Well, I certainly think that it would address the people that I know who have health care issues, who affordability is a very significant issue. A man who I've been seeing real recently, this would be a huge boost to get him to be able to feel like he has the freedom to go and use the healthcare system when he needs to, and not just flagrantly, because we quickly want to say that people are going to overuse the system or something like that, but he has some basic medical issues that if he maintained them well, if he kept himself able to get the proper diagnosis and research and resources to do that, he could be just a much healthier person. And I do. I think the Healthy Wisconsin plan addresses a person in his situation in a very significant way.
We ended up with a budget later than most people expected, but without any provision for Healthy Wisconsin. Is that a defeat?
Absolutely not. As I mentioned, we had the very best debate that we've ever had here in the state of Wisconsin on health care reform. This is the only time in the history of our state where we passed significant reform in one of the two houses of the legislature. This is a major step forward. It's making a commitment here in the state of Wisconsin to take one of the most progressive pieces of legislation and push it through. Could we have passed it in the Assembly? Not with the current makeup of the Assembly, but with a very few votes to change the balance of power in the Assembly. We could pass it in the Assembly. Can this be done? It can be done if the people of the state of Wisconsin say to their elected officials, I'm going to support you if you're willing to pass significant health care reform.
Can this happen before another election?
No, it cannot. What will happen right now is that we're working on a version of the bill that is not part of the budget, but will be what the legislature calls a standalone bill, meaning it stands by itself. It will be introduced to the Health Committee. It will come forward through the next 3 months in the Senate. We will pass it out of the Senate and lay it before the Assembly, but the Assembly will not take action. The votes are not there in the Assembly this spring to be able to pass the bill. Can it happen after the election? I certainly hope so. But the decision rests with the people of the state of Wisconsin and the people that they send for me to work with in the Assembly.
Is this more or less a partisan divide between Democrats and Republicans?
I don't think that it has to be. Being a part of the budget, it's difficult to know whether or not, if the bill was not part of the budget, that it would actually have been supported by Republicans. I've been talking with Republicans on both sides of the aisle. I'm in both of the two chambers, and there are people who are interested in seeing real health care reform happen. I've also been talking with people in the governor's staff and in the administration to talk about ways that we can advance health care reform in the way that the governor and the executive branch feel comfortable. I think there's a lot of room for us to move forward, given that we took the first big step of passing Badger Care Plus, which expands those people that are eligible for Medicaid and Badger Care, and that in itself is a substantial step forward.
So, in the upcoming debate, is this essentially going to be an academic issue?
No, absolutely not. Because when you think about what has to happen for a bill to pass, we have to have the support of different groups, stakeholders around the state. We have seen the beginning of that groundswell of support. We saw a coalition that was put together of 35 different organizations that called themselves the Big Tent Coalition that gathered together and supported Healthy Wisconsin. We're now seeing, since the bill was pulled out of the budget, we're seeing that group grow even larger. We're seeing people that had never supported Healthy Wisconsin before come forward and say, would you consider this, and what can we do to, perhaps we suggest that you make these small changes, and then we'd be willing to support the bill. That's the kind of snowball effect that needs to happen to be able to develop that strong grassroots support for the bill. It isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to happen one step at a time with a group saying, this is what we need, this is what we're willing to support. Having the bill in the budget has opened up many conversations with different people who have concerns about the bill or have concerns about health care and want to figure out how to fix it. So what we've done is we've taken a very big first step to make this happen. There are many other pieces that have to come into play. One of those pieces is to bring small business around to the point where they're supporting the bill. And to that end, I've been working with one of the small business organizations to come up with ideas on how to make the Healthy Wisconsin plan work for small businesses. And when we come out with a new bill, we're going to be looking at some innovative ways to help small business so that they feel like they're able to support the bill and that it would be a help to them rather than a hindrance.
Does the pain that the national economy seems to be going through with mortgage companies having difficulty in mortgage holders and those who have mortgages on their homes having uncertainty, does all of this financial difficulty in the nation make it more difficult to consider some kind of progressive new change like this? Actually,
I think it may make it easier, because when you look at uncontrolled business costs, when you look at healthcare costs, healthcare is one of those quickly rising, uncontrolled aspects of doing business. When we think about what will move Healthy Wisconsin forward, when we think about the pressures that have to happen to make a progressive change like Healthy Wisconsin is, what has to happen is the devil that we don't know has to be better than the devil that we do know. And what we're seeing in business all across our state is that the healthcare costs are unsustainable. People cannot continue So what's happening is those people, those businesses are shifting those costs then onto their workers. The workers can't continue to sustain the increase in health costs, and they're picking up more and more of that amount. The people that have insurance, those are the people who are going to drive the train on what happens, because they cannot sustain the costs that they're looking at right now. And in a tight economy, when you look to cut costs, you're looking at partly what can you do to control those costs that you now can't. Think about competition. Think about a business competing in the world market. I've had people come forward and say, I am a Republican. I am not in favor of any kind of government-run health care, but I need Healthy Wisconsin because I cannot compete. My biggest competitor is in Canada. My biggest competitor is in Germany. Canada and Germany do not internalize the cost of their product. Do not internalize health care into the cost of their product. It's something external, and that's what we need to look for in the United States. And it is that very difficult economic times that may actually drive us to pass something like Healthy Wisconsin.
What has been the most difficult objection that you've had to face in promoting this?
The most difficult objection is what to do with businesses that do not now offer health insurance to their employees. And most of these businesses are startup businesses. Most of them are small. Many of them are in the service sector or the retail sector, and most of them have very low margins. And when we think about businesses with very low margins, we want that business to be able to grow. We want it to be able to compete with other businesses. We want it to thrive. Small business is the engine that drives our economy. And yet, too often, I see in Madison, the decisions that are made are not helping the small businesses. They're helping the large businesses. Large businesses do not pay their fair, especially multi-state businesses do not pay their fair share of Wisconsin taxes. It's often the burden that falls on the small business. So what we're looking at are different options on how to help small businesses so that they become advocates for Healthy Wisconsin, and they see Healthy Wisconsin as something that can really assist them in helping their business be more competitive. We also want to help the business right now that is shouldering the health care burden, because there is an unfair competition for those businesses that are not. So we want to make sure that whatever solution that we come up with for small business, that it helps both those people that are now providing health insurance as well as those businesses that are not.
But essentially, whatever legislative action is taken in the early part of 2008, you're expecting no finalization positively for Healthy Wisconsin.
That's my assessment at this time. I'd certainly like to hope that I was wrong, but as we've seen from the debate on Healthy Wisconsin, there was no alternative plan that came from the Republican-controlled Assembly. I very much would like to see an alternative plan. I have spoken with some of the Republican senators, and I think there's an interest, at least among my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the Senate, to see serious health care reform happen. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the same type of support from the Assembly Republicans. That needs to happen, and if that happens, I would be most grateful. If it doesn't happen, I think we need to have the voters need to have some serious conversations with their legislators about their priorities, and I do believe that this is going to be a serious election issue, and it would be a mistake for any Republican that was running as an incumbent to ignore health care reform.
Is Wisconsin a less progressive state now than it has the image of being historically?
That's an interesting question, and I'm sorry to say that it probably is. It isn't that we can't reclaim our title. I've been privileged to be a part of a team that the legislature and the governor sent to Chicago to work with 13 other states, and the team consisted of both legislators and people from the executive branch to look at health care reform and to look at our options. And we called ourselves Team Wisconsin because we were one of, like I said, 14 states that were making significant progress on health care reform. Wisconsin, although we were invited to be one of those 14 states that were moving forward, we were not in the forefront. And right now, California and Massachusetts are quite a bit ahead of where Wisconsin is, and they've come up with some very novel ideas that now Massachusetts has passed the legislation, is in the implementation phase, and California has an agreement between the legislature and the governor to try and find a compromise, even though they represent two different parties. So when I think about where Wisconsin is, we certainly could move forward, but and we did move part of the way by passing this out of the Senate, but we haven't moved all the way, and some other states are moving faster than we are.
And you don't expect any change in that until there's a change in who's holding office?
Well, I think that who's holding office is significant. I think many of the decisions we make in Madison are decisions that the people make on Election Day by who they decide to send to the legislature. That doesn't mean that people can't change their ways. I believe in the possibility of redemption. I think it's possible that the Assembly Republicans could see the light and say, absolutely, we are going to find some common ground. There are many, many options for common ground. What we absolutely need to see is a Republican proposal that deals with the basic issues. We have to deal with how we're going to cover the people who don't have insurance. We have to deal with how we're going to cover rising costs. Costs have to be controlled, and we have to deal with the problem of how we pay for health care, how we finance health care. What Healthy Wisconsin did was it changed both the way we handle health care and the way we handle risk, and we have to deal with how to streamline administration in the system. Absolutely, we're spending way too much money on administration with 750 different companies, each having different billing, each requiring different type of paperwork. We have to change that. We cannot afford the inefficiencies in our current system. If we could deal with a plan, if the Republicans put forth a plan that deals with access, deals with costs, deals with problems of administrative costs, and deals with paying for health care, then we can have a real discussion about moving the state forward and reclaiming our title as the progressive state in the Union.
But those who like the system the way it is, those who influenced the legislature this time, are likely to continue to try to do so, aren't they?
Absolutely. The people who benefit from the current system don't want to see the current system change. That's one of the wonders of our representative democracy. Everyone has the ability to petition their government. Unfortunately, those people who are well off have the resources to be able to hire someone to petition their government. They also have the resources to be able to influence the public through advertising, direct mail, and television and radio ads, and that's exactly what happened. Those people who control the message in the media, frequently those are the voices that are heard the most. So if we're going to succeed at this, the people who set the opinion, the people who elect the officials are going to have to see through the propaganda. They're going to have to see the people who are paying for these ads as who they are, which are people who benefit from the current system, and they're going to have to make a decision about what's in the best interest of the state by who they send to the legislature.
Are you expecting a big turnover in the next election?
I am expecting that we will see some turnover. When we look at how the whole state is organized, there are very few what we call swing districts left, so that there are some districts that are solidly Republican, there are some that are solidly Democrat, but there are some districts that tend to go one way or another. We may not see a significant turnover, but even if we had a turnover of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, in the big picture number, that would be enough to sway the majority one way or another.
And what is the alternative if nothing gets passed?
The alternative? The alternative is, if nothing gets passed, we're left with the same misery we're in now. I was just had public hearings yesterday in financial institutions concerning predatory practices of mortgage foreclosures and people who are coming in and pretending they're going to save people and stealing everything away from them. This happens, and in the cases they were talking about, people were in those positions because they had health care costs that went so high they couldn't make their house payments anymore. And that is a huge, huge part of what's happening right now with this foreclosure epidemic that we have in this country. You know, so if nothing happens, this continues. People's lives are being ruined because of the cost of health care. And so, that said, that's where we're being left. And it is absolutely appalling that we have leadership that says they will do nothing about it.
Senator Van Hout, of course, being one of the key advocates for the Healthy Wisconsin proposal, says that she is not optimistic, and that the voters should take over in the next election and make changes in the Assembly if the Assembly is going to be a stumbling block to anything getting done on this issue.
I can't disagree, and I just spoke with Senator Van Hout again yesterday. We stay in close contact. She is also starting to get frustrated with the fact that not only we're losing hope that something will happen this year, but also the fact that she's kind of being excluded from what's happening behind closed doors in adjusting the previous plan. But whatever happens, we hope that they're taking our suggestions and listening. But on the note, when what you just said, that was the next step I was going to take too, is that if nothing happens this time, the result hopefully will be an uprising of voters who say we've had enough of this type of leadership. But that said, if, again, like I said earlier, if our party gets into the leadership and we behave the same way, we should also be strung out, or at least our leadership should be. And I will be the first one out there saying the same things about them that I'm saying about leadership now, because it doesn't matter where it comes from. If we get lack of leadership on the most important issue of the day, then they ought to be replaced. And that's just the way it is.
Is this a partisan matter where you think all the Republicans should go?
This should not be a partisan. And you started this conversation with the fact that Jeff Wood and myself, and Jeff Wood is a Republican, and we have talked a lot about this issue. And Jeff is a reasonable person who does appreciate the fact that this is an important issue, and we agree on much of the direction we think this should go. This is way beyond partisan issue. You know, as far as the effects, as far as where this has now languished for so long, this is not a partisan issue. But unfortunately, the politics involved have made it partisan. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter what the issue is, I'm finding out down there. It doesn't matter what the issue is, partisan politics take over. And there's leadership on at least the other side, from what I can understand, who really drive home you need to vote this way or that way on certain issues. I have not experienced that on my side of the aisle, but maybe because I'm such a hard-nosed guy, they just leave me alone. I don't know, but I have never had anybody tell me I had to vote one way or the other. But it seems to be happening quite a bit down there, despite that. And so we turn something that is so truly negatively affecting people, and we're down there to protect people, and yet we turn it into a partisan issue and do nothing. It's a terrible, frustrating system right now.
Through the decades, in places outside of Wisconsin, and of course I'm a newcomer to this state, but Wisconsin has had a reputation of being a state that is progressive on issues like this. Do you think that reputation is at risk or even lost with what has happened lately? I'm
glad you asked that question. This is such an appropriate time to ask that question, and the reason I say that is because I absolutely would, my answer would be yes, we are definitely at risk. I think we are already beyond that point. I think we are now. take the smoking ban, for instance. Now, no matter how you feel about that smoking ban, it's something that's sweeping the country and it's all around us. And what are we doing? We can't seem to agree on how to implement ours, and instead we do nothing. So we become the regressive state instead of the progressive state. Now, the reason I say it's appropriate right now is because we just lost one of our most flamboyant governors in recent history in Lee Dreyfus. And if you had read any of those stories about Lee Dreyfus, one of the most profound acts during his one term as governor was that he was the first governor, and we were the first state to pass legislation that protected the rights of gay citizens. Now that was only, 30 years ago? Or maybe even less than that, I don't remember now, 25 years ago. In that short time, we've gone from being a progressive state, taking the lead, something that we believed in and protecting everyone, and becoming a state that not only won't we protect people, we're pretty much changing our constitution and telling people we won't protect them, and we're just totally become a regressive state instead of the progressive state that we used to be proud of. And it was Republican and Democrat back then. I mean, it was a thinking of we're going to get things done and we're going to do the right thing to protect people. Let's get that back.
Some suggest that the failure of Wisconsin to act on this early on has been an indication that the state has lost its long-standing of a decades-long leader in progressive legislation.
Well, our progressive reputation goes back, closer to a century, I think. But just look at the last decade. You have senior care, which was, kind of the star of the country before Medicaid Part D came out, and it's still better than it. It's at least what I hear from most people. You have Badger Care. That was, Tommy Thompson created that in the 90s, dealing with health care for people who can't afford it. You have our Hearst program. Now you have Badger Care Plus from Governor Doyle. I mean, these are all progressive steps. So I don't think the fact that we didn't adopt a bill that's never had a hearing that completely throws health care on its head doesn't mean we're not progressive. I think it means we're not irresponsible. And I hope that people want us to have a little bit more scrutiny over any proposed changes than just, it looked good in the newspaper and, to heck with a public hearing or getting any answers to the questions. Let's just force this on people, because, a freshman senator is making threats that if we don't, we should be thrown out of office. I have a responsibility to my constituents to make sure I understand what I'm voting for before I pledge and cast a vote. And if you sit and hold a bill and won't have a public hearing on it and won't answer questions to it, you're not going to win my vote. And I have a long history of crossing party lines. I have many examples where I've been one of a group of Republicans to cross party lines, or when I've been the only one. It's been several times. I'm sure it'll happen again. But that's not because I was threatened. It was because I looked at the issue and saw that, there was a valid point and the legislation was good, and I voted for it. But if I can't even look at the bill, if I can't have a public hearing and answer my questions, I'm not going to cast my vote whether, a senator makes a threat or not.
What's your expectation now?
My expectation is that there's going to be a few smaller pieces of healthcare reform going through both houses, I think, in the next couple of months. My expectation in the Senate, as far as Healthy Wisconsin goes, I would hope that they'd at least, start the legislative process and have a public hearing, rather than just beating us up for not supporting something that they're hiding. But, if we want to reform the healthcare system, we have to have the ideas out in the open, not hashed out behind a closed door and stuck into a budget that nobody gets to see. And so, until Senator Reinhold gets serious about actually making her bill become law, I don't think it has really a chance of going anywhere. But that's her responsibility. She has the power to write a bill, introduce it, and get a committee hearing. She has yet to do that. We're halfway through the session. She hasn't done that. So until she does, she can't really get upset for somebody not voting for it.
U.S. Representative Ron Kind of the 3rd District of Wisconsin is presenting some ideas about health care. As a new member of the House Ways and Means Committee, he is presenting those ideas as part of his small business agenda.
Well, healthcare has got to be #1 domestic priority. It affects everyone, from individuals to businesses large and small, to small family farmers here in the state. And that's why I've been focused on healthcare reform out in Washington. Legislation I'm introducing this year would establish a national purchasing pool for small business and family farmers to be able to join, bring health care costs so it's more affordable to them. Of the 45 million uninsured, 60% of those people are actually working in small businesses who can't afford to provide health care coverage for them. So I think it's a good place to start looking when you want to close the uninsured gap in this country. But we also have to be focused on the rising costs of health care and what's driving that. And that's why I've been a leading advocate to going to a performance-based and outcomes-based reimbursement system. So healthcare providers are paid for the results of their care and not just on the number of tests and the number of visits that they happen to be doing. And that would lead, I think, to greater efficiencies, greater quality of care, and also a reduction in the costs to the average American.
Do you believe that there's a lot of abuse or carelessness in how health care is managed in the nation today?
I think there's a lot of streamlining, a lot of efficiencies that we can get that's currently not being discovered right now. And it's based on, in part, a reimbursement system that reimburses based on the number of tests, based on the length of the hospital stay, rather than based on whether it's actually helping and working for the patient, for us consumers. And that's where the focus needs to be. And you also, there's still a tremendous amount of fraud and abuse and waste within the delivery of health care that we have to do a better job of oversight and bring accountability to that type of fraud when it's discovered.
Your fellow congressman and former presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich would like to see a single-payer plan like Canada has. What would be the result of that, in your opinion?
Well, you know, Dennis is a good friend of mine. We came into the Congress together. I like a lot of his interesting ideas. I just don't think the nation is ready to go to a single-payer system. When you have close to 2/3 of Americans who are getting their health coverage through an employer-sponsored plan, it's very easy to scare them in accepting an entirely different system that wouldn't be employer-based. I think there are ways of working with employers to expand coverage and affordability for their employees. We've got to be focused on the uninsured in this country and in the state of Wisconsin to make sure that they have access. And we've got to be focused on the cost of the delivery of health care too. But I don't think the nation is ready for a straight single-payer system that other countries have set up. Their systems are different. The area of compensation is different. Just to mention one, they compensate their doctors a whole lot different in those single-payer countries than how we compensate doctors here in America. And that would be a huge obstacle to going to a single-payer system.
With the proposals you're making and the other proposals that are likely to hit the House and the Senate in Washington, does that mean that health care is going to be sufficiently addressed at the federal level so the state doesn't need to worry about it?
You know, I think there is going to be a lot of attention at both the federal and state level, and it's being driven by the consumers of health care. There is a great consensus here in Wisconsin and throughout the country that we're reaching crisis epidemic when it comes to the delivery of affordable health care to Americans, businesses large and small. I'll tell you that's their #1 concern, the rising cost of health care. Individuals struggling to make health care premiums or paying deductibles will tell you that that's having a huge impact on family budgets, and it's because of that focus that people are recognizing that it's getting the attention of policymakers both in Washington and here in Madison. And that's what it's going to take, all of us working together to try to figure out a solution to all this.
Since you don't expect a positive legislative result in the near future for Wisconsin, what do you have to say for people who may be personally or as families experiencing a health care crisis now and may be very impatient for something to happen?
Well, first of all, if they're my constituents, they should definitely contact my office. With the expansion of Badger Care Plus, people who were never eligible for Badger Care now will be eligible. And in the short term, to get us through this problem that we're looking at in the short term, where the state of Wisconsin is moving towards bringing in people who do not have children but would be, because of their income level, would be eligible for Medicare, or for Medicaid, are not yet eligible for Medicare. And those people are what we call childless adults, and there are many people, about 71,000 people in the state of Wisconsin that could possibly be eligible. The state of Wisconsin is working with the federal government to allow those people to be part of the Badger Care program. Unfortunately, it won't go into effect until about this time next year, about January 2009. But what we're doing is preparing for that time. We're also preparing for the time that in February of 2008 there will be a radical or pretty substantial expansion of Badger Care, which again, Badger Care Plus it does bring in all children, and it brings in people who are parents of children. It's always been a problem to bring in people who don't have children or have children over the age of 19. So I would say, first of all, they need to contact my office. We will do everything we can to try and find those safety net programs that would help them, or they need to contact their legislator if I'm not their senator. And then, second of all, they need to talk to their friends, they need to talk to their family, they need to talk to their legislators, they need to talk to me and my office. We need to make the awareness of what the problem is as loud as we possibly can. Elected officials read newspapers. They listen to television. They're media hounds. And these people are going to see, the elected officials are going to see if there are letters to the editor, if there's somebody talking on television, if there's somebody calling into a radio show. They're going to pay attention to what the people want. This is the way that change happens. Change happens because the people want change to happen. It's very, very important that people keep the pressure on their legislators to continue to push for a healthy Wisconsin. This can happen, but the change is going to happen out in the communities. Madison is going to respond to that change. But I found, as a leader in the Senate on this issue, that even among my own caucus and among my own colleagues in the Senate, I need to continue to say, we have to get this done now. We have to get it done now. There are too many people that are hurting. We need to make those voices heard, and people can help make those voices heard.
Have you been discouraged by the governor's failure to be a force for advocating this?
Well, I think initially I was discouraged, but I'm learning a lot working with a group of people that I told you were brought together by Robert Wood Johnson, by a grant from Robert Wood Johnson that we called Team Wisconsin. I am one of two legislative members, but the rest of the other team, some are business people, some work for advocacy groups, but about half of the people work for the administration. And I have the opportunity in that capacity to work with people from the governor's office and to work with people from the Department of Health and Family Services. And in doing that, I've begun to understand that the governor is receptive to substantial health care reform. And there is a lot of common ground between the Senate and the governor. And ultimately, the governor and the legislature needs to work together to find that common ground. I think there are a lot of options. There's a lot of room between the Senate's proposal and the governor's proposal of Badger Care Plus. We're exploring where that common ground is. We've got a little bit of time. We will put forward Healthy Wisconsin, and we ask for the governor's support. But there are also many options that we have in that middle ground that we can make substantial reform happen.
Do you feel like that the timetable is maybe a year off?
I do. I do feel like the timetable is maybe a year off. Again, the people have an obligation. The people who vote have an obligation to send people to the legislature that are committed to making health care reform happen.
What about those who seem to avoid discussing the issue who are holding office now. Are they going to be called to account and take a side one way or another?
That very much depends on their constituents, the people who elected them. Ultimately, those people who go to the ballot box make the decision of holding them accountable when they vote. There are many opportunities in a campaign for forums, many groups. We had many forums where people are asked questions, and there's some back and forth with the audience. And sometimes, depending on how it works, people submit their questions to a moderator. And then there's many informal opportunities, whether it be a county fair or a parade or somebody knocking on your door. There are many opportunities for that interaction between the legislator and the constituent. A lot of people write letters to their legislators, and the legislators write back and say what their position is, and sometimes those letters become public, and then the public more than that constituent knows what the answers were. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in a campaign for people to hold their legislators accountable, but ultimately the people have the power, and if the legislator is not representing the people, they will speak.
So you are optimistic about something happening, although you're pessimistic about it being anytime soon.
What will happen is that the Senate will put forth a slightly changed version of Healthy Wisconsin. When we do that, when we put it forward, there will be a lot of public pressure on the Assembly to act. It is possible that the Assembly will come forward with their own version of health care reform. This is the best of the possibilities that could happen this spring. If we do that, if we have the opportunity to counter with a proposal from the Assembly, then we would have the opportunity to sit down in the conference committee and hash out the details. We were hoping that that would happen during the budget process, but absolutely nothing came forward from the Assembly. That was disheartening, to see no counter proposal at all. If we saw a counter proposal, that would be the window that we needed to be able to negotiate a fair change for all of us. Given that no proposal comes forward, then I think it's back to the people in next summer and next fall's election.
Some people would say that the government should stay out of health care. You, as I understand it, don't go that far.
Well, no, I mean, it's nice to say that, but government is in healthcare, and we're in it with both feet. I mean, look at the major costs of our rising medical care costs are the cost shifting that's going on in the private sector, and that's due to government. Government insures people through Medicare and Medicaid, and then we reimburse the hospitals and the doctors, as low as 58% of their costs for the coverage that they have to provide. When we do that, that other 42% of the cost gets shifted onto the private sector. So people paying their insurance premiums out there are seeing health care increase. Well, a lot of it's because the government is demanding services from the healthcare industry and only paying half the bill. And so government is in the healthcare industry. We regulate it. We're involved in the financing of our retired citizens. We have 250,000 government employees in this state that all receive their insurance, from a government plan. Doctors are licensed by the state of Wisconsin. It's ridiculous to say that government shouldn't be involved in health care. I mean, it has to be. It has been historically, and it'll continue to be. Now, whether or not that means we should kick the private sector out of the health care industry, that's another step that I don't think we should go.
Do you feel like we're bogged down now where no progress can be made?
Well, no, I don't. I think there's a lot of bills out there that have a chance of getting signed into law and getting bipartisan support that can improve things out there. The governor, for example, with Badger Care Plus, that's addressing part of the problems with accessibility for people who can't afford to get insurance. And that's a good step forward. Terry Moulton has had a lot of bills kind of at a different angle from healthcare than what Healthy Wisconsin approaches, and that's looking at the wellness issue and keeping costs down and giving consumers more choice and more ability to control the markets through purchasing power. A little bit of a different take on it. I think a lot of different approaches are needed. But I'm optimistic that there's going to be some reforms that get support from both sides. Whether or not it's going to be a complete takeover of the private healthcare industry, I don't see that very likely.
Well, if it isn't health care reform, it better be campaign finance reform, because therein lies a big part of the problem across the whole country. Wisconsin could be a leader in campaign finance reform. We reform campaign financing, and then you'll see health care get done. You will see a whole different legislature in how things get done, because policy won't be determined by groups that support one party or the other. And that's where partisanship really begins. It begins with particular groups who choose which side they want to support. And therein lies where what I see in a lot of people is the way they think about their votes or their policy is, well, what would this group want me to do? We need to get away from that.
So do you see big money as being the obstacle to healthy Wisconsin and campaign finance reform?
No doubt about that. And I don't think, and that's no surprise to anyone. I mean, I'm not telling anybody anything new. It's not exactly the way you may interpret that. Big money doesn't go into a politician's pocket, but it keeps them in office. And it keeps, for instance, the majority party in power. It's all about power. It's all about ego and power, and how do you keep that? And so when you get anybody in that legislature who says, even in the leadership right now is doing this, we're not going to do anything about campaign finance reform, we're not going to do anything about health care reform, those are very much tied together, because they hold the power and they won't keep the power if they address those issues and lose the support of the major corporate money that is putting them in office now.
Are those of you who support health care reform just going through the motions during this year?
No, I wouldn't say that, Wayne. I'm really proud of all of the things that we have done this year. The first thing we did to begin this year was pass an ethics reform bill that only happened because of the election of 2006 and how people voted, and so the reaction of the leadership then was, oh, this is what people really do want, and we better act on it because they're going to throw us out in 2008. Because in 2005, they refused to act on ethics reform. So what happens? So I'm trying to point out the fact that they refused. The voters spoke up. The first thing we did was take that up. That's what I'm saying. And the same thing Kathleen Vinehout, I think, in a backdoor way, is saying that's what's got to happen here too. If they refuse to take it up, the voters need to speak up. Guess what will happen in 2009?
Even if all their candidates don't win, and their votes do make a difference in what happens in Madison.
Well, again, I'll go back to your previous question, because even during the course of the year, even though it seems, I don't feel like it's fruitless, whatever we have been doing, presenting options like my bill and like the bill that was in the Senate, presenting those options out there, getting the public talking about them, and getting a lot of attention about that, positive and negative, is a great step towards accomplishing the final goal. Unfortunately, government wheels turn slow, politics is slow, and we have to work out a lot of these particular issues and maybe really get, again, to a point where we go after the leadership and say, this has got to get done. I don't care what is holding you in power. You've got to do something about this. I think that has all that is all worthwhile, even though it doesn't get done in this year. The work you do, you have to be patient, and know that the fruits of your labor is at the end of the road, and that's where we're headed.
So you're laying a foundation at this point.
That's exactly right, and we're not going to quit. We're not quitting. That's why we're there. People spoke up again, like I said, in 2006. It wasn't just about ethics reform, but apparently the leadership thought they would appease everyone with just that one issue. But it was health care reform, and it was campaign finance reform. It was all of these things. So, yeah, I truly believe my first term has been laying exactly, that's a very good way to put it, laying that foundation. We know where we're going. We're going to keep going there, and we're not going to let partisan politics stop us in our tracks. We're going to keep pushing.
How have you dealt with those who just say, this is another step along the road to socialized medicine?
Well, I smile a little bit because I used to teach the history of medicine, the history of healthcare reform, and one of the things I taught my students was about the opposition in the past to real healthcare reform. And the first time healthcare reform was introduced was in 1906, and those people who were criticized because they were promoting real healthcare reform were called socialists. So the whole criticism of moving towards socialized medicine is something that's really lost its teeth with the fall of Russia and the Berlin Wall and the power of the Soviet Union. I don't think there's anybody that thinks that communism here in America is a real threat. But our arguments are hard to die. When you think about public financing, we think about our public schools, we think about our roads, we think about our postal system. There are many places in our economy where the government is involved in at least the organizing, if not the running, of those services that we all take for granted. Healthy Wisconsin is not a government takeover of the healthcare system. We count on the private sector to continue to be able to deliver health care. What we do in Healthy Wisconsin is we set the rules, and these rules have far too often been set by insurance companies. Over the years, we've seen an erosion of the rules that govern insurance companies. What we're doing is taking us back to the 1960s, where we did have something called community rating, meaning no one was denied care because everyone was issued a policy, and people were paid their policies based on the rating of the entire pool. I frequently talk about how if you put everyone in one pool, you lower the risk and you lower the cost, and that's exactly what we do with Healthy Wisconsin. The government doesn't provide the care, the government doesn't pay doctors, the government doesn't pay hospitals. Instead, what happens is those hospitals and doctors competitively bid through their own organization, whether it be an HMO or an organization of physicians or doctors and hospitals. One of the great misunderstandings of Healthy Wisconsin is the whole propaganda related to whatever socialized medicine is or isn't. Should the government set rules? We set the rules in every industry, whether we're talking about trucking or we're talking about insurance. The rules are set by government. That's the role of government, is to step in and set the rules when the public themselves cannot or need to have the rules set, that need someone to set the rules in a bigger way.
We could end up eventually with the federal government establishing a program that is much more extensive, a single-payer type system. Do you see that happening? I do think that there will be a change in the party that controls the White House. And I do think that when that happens, we will see much more flexibility at the federal level to allow the states to experiment, which will help the state of Wisconsin move forward regardless of who's in control in the Assembly and the Senate. I think there's a real interest at the federal level. There's sort of a pent-up demand at the federal level to try and move things forward. There are many people that work in the various agencies that have wanted to see health care reform happen, but there wasn't a will among the administration. I think when there's a change in the presidency and the White House, I think we will see a lot of movement. There are some very specific things that Congress and the federal government could do to change the rules that we follow at the federal level that could help health care reform move much faster at the state level. Other issues, though, have distracted you because they are important other issues as well. So has that been difficult to keep track of all the other issues you have to be involved with and still keep this a high priority?
I think that changing healthcare is so much a part of who I am. It's my identity. It's been my life for almost 30 years. It's so much a part of who I am that it will never go away. It is who I am. There are times in the legislative process where there are ebbs and flows to different issues. There are times when one issue may have a great deal of activity privately, but not much activity publicly. There are times when there's a lot of activity publicly and it looks like a great deal is happening, but it's just because what has happened in private has now become public. So I expect that there will be ebbs and flows in terms of what the public sees that's happening, but they can know that no matter what happens, this is an issue that is always on the front burner for me.
And they should have confidence that you're going to see it through.
Absolutely, even if it takes me a career.
Legislators and others continue to work for health care reform in Madison and in Washington, but the future success of their efforts remains uncertain. This has been Healthy Wisconsin, an ongoing struggle. I'm Wayne Sorge.